My hands are slick with blood and mud, my radio dead, and somewhere in the swirl of chaos, the desperate faces of 12 students flash before me, each pair of eyes begging for a promise I fear I can't keep. But I won't let that happen. I can still feel the weight of my pack settling into my shoulders as we trudge down the narrow game trail. Dawn's first light filtered through the spruce canopy, casting mottled shadows across moss-draped boulders. My breath came in steady clouds, and for a moment, I let myself sink into the rhythmic crunch of pine needles underfoot. Out here, away from fluorescent classrooms and the constant ping of emails, I felt closer to who I once was. Before I became Mr. Calder, the math teacher, the chaperone, the responsible adult, I spent every summer backpacking through these same woods. My father taught me how to read moss rings and follow animal trails. He said the forest spoke if you were quiet enough, the low whistle of wind through needles, the sudden hush when a thrush froze on a branch. On days like this, I half expected to hear him again, telling me to slow my pace. Behind me, 12 sets of student boots crunched and slipped over exposed roots. I'd selected this campsite because it was remote enough to teach them basic wilderness skills, firecraft, compass reading, even leave no trace principles, yet close enough to the old logging road in case of real emergency. I wanted them to feel the forest's grandeur, its unforgiving impartiality. Not a ghost story, not a horror legend, just the unvarnished truth that nature doesn't negotiate. I paused to take inventory. Water bottles full, first aid pack stowed in my day pack, radio sealed in its plastic bag. The students were clustered ahead, laughing about something I didn't catch. I forced a smile beneath my stubble. Normalcy calmed them, and it settled my nerves too. Outwardly, I needed to be steady, unshakable. Inside, a low hum of anxiety thrummed. Because 3 years ago, on a similar trip, someone got hurt. Not just a twisted ankle, hurt in a way no one saw coming. The memory flickered every time I led a group into the wild, the crack of a boulder shifting underfoot, the look of shock on a friend's face as her leg snapped. I promised myself I'd never feel that helpless again, that I'd stay vigilant here, on this ridge. We broke through a final stand of spruce into a narrow clearing beside a crystal spring. The kids jostled instantly for spots along the bank. I sank down on a flat rock, the cold stone seeping through my jeans, and watched them. Karina knelt by the water, her dark ponytail flicking as she filled her canteen. Marcus hefted a backpack that still looked too big for him. I'd warned them all, pack light, stay within your limit. Some had listened, some had not. Mr. Calder, came a tentative voice. Jenna, third row, pale skin freckled like a road map, pointed toward the west ridge. Are those clouds? I looked up. There, just beyond the ridgeline we'd crossed before dawn, a seam of dark gray was pulling like a bruise across the sky. Just low-hanging cumulus, I said, though my throat tightened. The forecast had called for only scattered showers, no gusts or thunderstorm warnings. I double-checked that morning, but those clouds were gathering too fast, too deliberately, as if they'd been waiting for us. I forced myself to stand, stepping back into lead. We'll set up camp here, I announced. Last chance for water. Then we haul tents and supplies before the wind picks up. I kept my voice firm, but inside I counted heartbeats, tried to will my pulse back to normal. The students moved with practiced efficiency. This was a school trip, after all, not a survival course. They drove stakes, threaded poles, unrolled sleeping bags. As I assembled the teacher's tent, a sturdy four-season rig, I glimpsed the wind tug at the canopy's edge. It rippled like a dark wave. A single clap of thunder rumbled across the ridge, soft at first, then louder, as though the sky had cracked open. A few students froze mid-zip on their tents. I dropped to one knee, bracing the tent's frame. Rain spattered in heavy droplets, each one like a tiny hammer against the nylon. Everyone inside. Now, I barked. Their laughter vanished, replaced by scurrying feet. I helped the last of them into the vestibule of my tent. Enough room for me and 2 students, but no more. Outside, the first gusts snapped like whip cracks. The forest seemed to lean in on us, branches groaning. My heart pounded in the low light. I looked around, 12 pairs of wide eyes staring back, faces pale, wet, fearful. And I realized for the first time that this wasn't a simple garden variety storm. The air vibrated with something sharp. Adrenaline sang in my veins. Stay calm, I said, though my voice betrayed a tremor. Find your buddy. Sit tight. I'll grab the radio. I clawed back into the torrential wind, mud sucking at my boots. Above the roar, I fumbled with the radio's power switch. Static. No signal. I shouted back over the wind, "Cell towers are down. We're on our own." Even to my ears, the words sounded far too final. Back inside, I knelt in the center of our cramped shelter. The rain hammered the fabric. Branches snapped, thudded against the ground like falling bodies. Somewhere beyond that roaring wall of water and wood, the tide of normalcy had broken. We were adrift now, with nothing but each other, the storm, and the wild. And it was my responsibility to keep them alive. Before we dive back in, let me know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. If the tension's got you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dive survival horror tales and don't miss a single heart-pounding moment. I pressed my shoulder against the tent's sloping wall, trying to block the stinging spray that found its way through tiny gaps. The wind whined like a wounded animal, each gust rocking us side to side. I forced myself to breathe steadily, deep, measured inhales to keep panic from rising in the student's eyes. Karina's knuckles whitened around her water bottle. "Mr. Calder, what do we do now?" she hissed, voice low. I met her gaze in the dim glow of our headlamps. "First," I said, "we make sure everyone's dry and warm." I reached into my pack and pulled out foil blankets, thin, crinkly sheets designed for emergencies. "Hand these out. Wrap them around your shoulders like capes." The students fumbled with them, the metallic fabric crackling as they draped the blankets over shaky shoulders. My mind raced back to my first solo backpacking trip at 16. How panic had nearly undone me when a sudden storm ripped through the canyon. I'd learned then that fear could burn you faster than hypothermia. I swallowed the memory, letting it steel my nerves instead of fracturing them. "Okay," I continued, voice firmer. "We've got food, trail bars, jerky, 3 gallons of water in the main pack. I'll ration, 1 bar per person, 1 small cup of water every 2 hours. Understood?" A chorus of nods. Relief flickered across tired faces. Order gave them purpose. A fresh roar of wind shook the tent. The ground trembled as a nearby branch cracked and tumbled down the slope, thumping the forest floor. Dust and bits of bark drifted in through the door flap. "Stay seated," I snapped. "No one moves until it's safe." Somewhere out there, the storm was transforming this peaceful valley into a hunting ground. Down from higher elevations, water torrents bulldozed mud and boulders toward us. The creek, once a gentle ribbon of crystalline flow, was now a raging artery, its thunderous pulse muffled but unmistakable even here. I shivered as awareness settled like ice in my chest. Once the storm peaked, the flat clearing where we pitched tents would flood. We were perched on a temporary island. When the water rose, escape by simply walking out wouldn't be an option. I glanced at each student's face in turn, Jenna's lips pressed into a thin line, Marcus hugging his knees, Leo shifting uncomfortably in the muffled darkness. All of them looked to me, searching for a plan. I felt the familiar weight of that burden settle on my shoulders once more. "Listen," I said softly, "we'll stick together. I know this feels like we're in a nightmare, but nightmares end when you wake up. We're not asleep. We're alive, and we've got each other." Silence settled, broken only by the storm's fury outside. In that moment, I realized the true test wasn't just warding off the storm. It was holding this fragile group of kids together, emotionally and physically, until the world righted itself again. I crawled from the tent, rain sluicing off my jacket. Every step was a gamble as mud sucked at my boots. I opened the main pack, fished out the emergency whistle, and blew a sharp single note, a signal we'd practiced at orientation. Inside the tent, muffled clicks and murmurs answered. I blew twice more. Then, voice raised above the roar, I shouted, "We move to the ridge at first light. Stay awake. Stay together. We do this together." As I sealed the pack and trudged back in, I could see understanding flicker in their eyes. Fear hadn't left us, but now it had focus. We weren't just waiting to be rescued. We were choosing to survive. The tent shuddered again, like a giant beast testing its prey. I sat down, unrolled my sleeping pad, and patted the spot beside me. "Rest if you can," I said. "We've got a long night ahead." Outside, the storm gathered strength, But inside, that fragile little room of silver blankets and anxious faces, something stronger was already awakening. Resolve. The wind's howling grew into a banshee's scream. I lay awake on my pad, listening to the tense fabric strain against the gusts. Every crack of wood on the ridge sounded like an explosion, each ripple through the canopy a foreshock of violence. I tightened my grip on my whistle, my link to the others, then forced myself to rest my mind on something steady, my father's old compass, snug in my breast pocket. Dawn arrived as a dim gray glow behind the clouds. The storm had not relented. It simply shifted from relentless fury into a grinding, soaked weight that pressed the world flat. I crawled out first, mud sucking at my boots, and flicked on my headlamp. The clearing was a slosh of puddles and torn canvas. Where 12 tents had stood, only shreds of nylon and broken poles remained. The spring beside us had swollen into a churn of milky brown foam that lapped at the spot where students had gathered the day before. I called a single blast on the whistle. One by one, sleepy, mud-spattered forms emerged from the wreckage of what had been their shelters. Karina clutched her blanket, fog rising from her hair. Jenna's cheek was smeared with dirt, and Marcus lowered his gaze to hide a bruise blossoming behind his ear. Each face was drawn and pale but alive. "Check yourselves," I said, voice low so they wouldn't panic again. "Head to toe. Any bleeding, fractures, concussion?" They murmured back, mostly minor cuts, one twisted ankle, a student complaining of a headache. I nodded. Nothing irreversible, yet. We moved as a pack toward higher ground, limping and slipping, each footstep a negotiation with gravity. The mud held my foot halfway, then spat it loose with a wet pop. Behind me, the students slipped and cursed under their breath. I glanced over my shoulder. The forest beyond the clearing was a blurred wall of gray-green, rain still sluicing through the needles. About 50 yards uphill, I'd spotted an old logging spur that ran along a slight ridge. It was narrow, slick, and flanked by rotten stumps, but it was higher than the floodplain. I had one rope in my pack and 3 carabiners, enough to secure 2 people at a time if we rigged a belay. It wouldn't be comfortable, but it was our best shot at solid ground. "Karina, you're first," I said, securing the rope around her waist. She swallowed hard, eyes wide, but she nodded and edged onto the rail. Below, the slosh of water grew louder. I belayed her inch by inch, heart pounding, until she reached firmer earth. Then Jenna, then Marcus. Each arrival was a little victory. Halfway up, I heard a sudden crack behind me and turned just in time to see the biggest spruce I'd ever set eyes on uproot itself. It came down in slow-mo, a twisting, splintering roar, and crashed where I'd been seconds before. I stumbled back, heart in my throat, mud spraying like shrapnel. When the tremor stopped, everything was still except for my own ragged breathing. I found the students huddled close beyond the felled trunk. No one else was hurt. Relief flooded me so sharply it made my vision swim. I swallowed twice and forced out, "This is why we move." I motioned them forward along the ridge. By mid-morning, the rain surrendered to a steady drizzle. We reached the spur's end at a mossy outcrop overlooking the flooded valley. From here, I could see the logging road half buried in mudslides and bramble. Rescue vehicles wouldn't navigate it until it was cleared, and clearing could take days. I gathered the group in a tight circle and knelt on one knee. "Listen," I said gently, "we've done the hard part, keeping everyone safe through the worst of the storm. Now, our goal is to signal for help and ration what we have until it arrives." I unfolded the waterproof tarp and spread our brightly colored emergency shelter over the rock. "This is our command post," I continued. "We'll use mirrors, flashlights, whatever we've got to signal, especially when the sun breaks. Marcus, you and Leo gather any loose branches to build a smoky signal fire here. Karina and Jenna, help me organize first aid." They sprang to action, energy renewed by a clear task. As I applied a makeshift splint to the twisted ankle, I felt the familiar burn of responsibility ease just enough for something else to surge. Hope. Out in that wild, storm-ravaged forest, it was the rarest currency, and I intended to spend it wisely, for all of us. The smoke from our makeshift fire curled into the drizzle, thin and gray, as if unsure whether to rise or be swallowed by the clouds. I crouched beside the flare-colored tarp, counting out bar after bar of granola and jerky scraps. 12 bars in my pack, 1 for each student, and 2 extra for emergencies. 12 cups of water measured in beaten metal bowls. I watched the students Eyes flick from their dwindling rations to the sodden forest around us. Eat slowly, I instructed. Half a bar now, half in 2 hours. My voice sounded brittle even to me. We'd all consumed enough calories fleeing the storm to last us for days, if we were careful. But in survival, days can feel like lifetimes. Karina tucked her foil blanket tighter around her shoulders and chewed in fast, anxious bites. Jenna poured a few drops of water into Marcus's cupped hands. Their small kindness warmed me more than the fire. Yet beneath that spark of hope lay a darker ember, the knowledge that even a small miscalculation now could cascade into catastrophe. I drew a deep breath of smoky air. Marcus, Leo, go back down the spur and find more brushwood for the fire. Be mindful of downhill slopes, mud can give way without warning. I handed Marcus the climbing rope. Tie off, take it with you. If one of you slips, the other can arrest the fall. They both nodded, eyes tight with determination. I sent them off, the rope like a lifeline trailing behind them into the mist. Left with Karina and Jenna, I pulled the tarp's corner over our first aid kit. Inside lay disinfectant wipes, bandages, aspirin tablets. Barely enough, but we'd make it work. Jenna's twisted ankle had swollen overnight. I gently pressed the makeshift splint into place, wrapping it with medical tape and gauze. Better? I asked. She tested her foot, grimacing. Pain's down. Thanks. She offered me a shaky smile. A new rumble of distant thunder vibrated through the ridge. The forest around us felt hollow, the rain's patter muffled by the thick canopy. I closed my eyes, letting a memory slide forward. My father, kneeling by a campfire in these very woods years ago, pressing a water filter between his palms and telling me that water is everything. Without it, your mind tricks you. Without it, you betray your own body. I opened my eyes to Karina's gaze. Mr. Calder? Just thinking, I said. We'll filter more water from the spring below. It's milky now, but I've got the purifier. Marcus and Leo can carry it up. She nodded, but I saw the question in her eyes. How much longer? How do we stay sane, keep going, when our bodies and our minds start to fold under pressure? I didn't have a pat answer, only the one I'd learned by heart. Put one foot in front of the other, always forward. Focus on tasks, gather, ration, signal. When you notice yourself drifting, recite the plan. Fire, water, signal. I let the mantra hang between us. If I repeated often enough, maybe I'd believe it too. Moments later, a crack of underbrush and the wet slap of boots announced Marcus and Leo's return. On the rope, they'd lowered 2 tin water bottles, half full, murky. Behind them, a bundle of sodden branches and moss. I helped them stack it on the fire, coaxing the embers back to life. As the flame caught, the branches hissed and steamed. I cupped my hands around the small glow. For a heartbeat, it felt like salvation. Then reality settled again. The ridge would flood. Night would come. We'd need to sleep, or at least lie still and conserve heat. Every success now was temporary, every breath a borrowed moment. I divided the new water into our bowls, another half cup per student, plus a small reserve in case of emergency. Drink, I said. Slow sips. I watched them lean forward, concentrating on that simple act. Because in a storm, searching for rescue, a single sip can feel like a reprieve. And in that reprieve, I found my own resolve stiffen. I would not let these kids down, not when they entrusted their lives to me, not after all we'd already endured. The fire crackled, the rain continued its steady drumbeat, and in the fragile warmth of that tiny blaze, we prepared ourselves to face the next test, together. A quarter-light shimmer through the mist told me dusk was falling faster than I realized. The ridge, once a refuge, felt suddenly brittle, as if the forest itself were quietly watching us. I snapped the lid back onto the last of our boiled and filtered water, then motioned the students closer to the fire. The rain had eased to a gentle patter, but the chill of early evening crept in, and the foil blankets did little to hold back the damp. Listen up, I whispered, voice low. We stick near the fire. No wandering off. If you need anything, water, blanket, morale, call me. Got it? They nodded, clustering like fledglings around our small hearth of smoky embers. Marcus's ankle throbbed, but he refused to sit, shifting from one foot to the other in the way of someone fighting helplessness. Jenna chewed the inside of her lip, eyes fixed on the tree line. Karina's gaze flitted between the darkness and our meager supplies. I pulled my flashlight from my belt and clicked it on, its beam cutting a narrow tunnel through the gloom. I'll go scout the perimeter. Find us a bit more shelter from the wind. Maybe some high limbs to hang a tarp over our heads. Leo, you're with me. Everyone else stays here. Leo's face lit with a mix of relief and determination. Thankful, I think, for a task that took him off of passive waiting. He slung my spare hand axe over his shoulder and followed as I crouched low, the flashlight's beam dancing over moss-clad stumps and slick stones. We'd moved barely 30 yards when a rustle snapped my head up. I froze, hand on Leo's shoulder. We both listened, wet leaves shifting, a soft crunch. I turned the beam toward the sound and caught two dark shapes. Bears, adults by the look of their hulking frames, slinking along the ridge above us, drawn by the scent of our fire and the promise of easy picks. Injured, vulnerable humans. God, Leo breathed. We backed away, careful not to trample the water bottles or rope. My pulse hammered in my ears, a mother bear with her cubs, maybe. Approaching them was suicide. I let out a slow whistle, the one we'd rehearsed to signal danger. Inside the glow of the fire, the students stiffened, and I heard Karina's breath catch. Then I whistled twice more, sharper, more urgent. The low rumble of thunder answered, and half of me was grateful for the storm's cover. The bears paused, sniffing the air, their heads lifted, sleek wet fur glistening in the flashlight's beam. Heavy paws creaked through the undergrowth. My mind screamed, "Get back to the fire, protect the students." But our path was narrow. Any sudden sprint risked slipping into the muddy slope. I leaned close to Leo. "We're drawing them away. Lead them downhill, away from camp. Move slowly." He nodded, face pale in the beam. I clicked off the flashlight and tipped the axe head toward the woods below. Then I turned and stomped down in a controlled rhythm. Thump, 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 making as much noise as I could without running. Leo mirrored me. Behind us, the undergrowth shuddered, the bears shifting to follow our trail. My heart drummed. Every instinct screamed to bolt, but I forced myself to keep the pace steady. Mud splashed around my boots as we zigzagged, buying distance from the ridge firelight. After 50 yards, we ducked into a shallow rock overhang. I crouched behind a boulder, pulling Leo with me. We waited, breath ragged, listening. Above us, the foreshortened echo of our whistle cut through the drip of rain. Then silence. Then the soft scrape of claws on stone. I caught sight of a massive shoulder, blunt, powerful, passing 10 feet above our heads. A growl rumbled low in the wet earth. I pressed my back to the cool stone, glancing at Leo's wide eyes. "Stay quiet," I mouthed, and he nodded, gripping the axe as if it were a lifeline. The growl faded. The scrape of claws retreated. My throat felt raw, but I swallowed hard. After what seemed like an eternity, I whispered, "They're moving on." Leo exhaled a breath I could feel against my shoulder. I peered back toward the ridge. The fire's glow was still there, flickering, small, defiant. My students, huddled together, must have seen movement, heard my whistle, known I risked my life for them. My chest tightened at the thought. When I judged the stretch clear, I led us back on a looping path that kept us hidden. 30 feet from the fire, I flicked on my flashlight. A risky move, but I needed their faces. One by one, I called softly, "It's safe. Get ready to move to the cave mouth I found. Bring blankets and water." Karina was the first to stand, clutching her foil blanket like a lifeline. Jenna's eyes were wide with terror, but she nodded and moved to retrieve her things. Marcus hobbled to me, jaw set. "They were huge," he said in a quaver. I thought I'd never see you again." I placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. "You were brave. We lure them away so you can stay safe. Now we stick to the plan." Together, we carried the fire and supplies 20 yards farther back to the cave mouth, a shallow overhang sealed by a fallen pine trunk that shielded us from any further bear patrols. Inside, we relit the fire with the embers carefully transported in a metal tin. The smoke curled out into the drizzle, drawing no more curious noses. We settled in, bodies pressed close. Kara's lamp cast dancing shadows on the boulders overhead. The storm's roar was muted here, replaced by the distant crash of rain into pools. I counted the students, 12, all accounted for, and for the first time since that first thunderclap, I let my guard down just enough to crack a tired half-smile. "Tonight," I said, voice low, "we rest. Tomorrow we signal for rescue. But tonight, we're together, and we're safe." Jenna leaned against my side. "Thank you," she whispered. Her words, so small, carried more weight than any rescue helicopter. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the fire seep into my bones. Outside, the forest held its breath. Inside our little cave, we held ours, and for now that fragile peace was all any of us needed. Night pressed against our little cavern mouth like a living thing. The thin fire sputtered, and every snap of steam as droplets hit hot coals sounded like a crack in my skull. I scanned the circle of pale faces, 12 bodies huddled in foil blankets, each one an echo of fear and exhaustion. My throat ached from talking, from ordering, from pretending that I had all the answers. Then I heard it, a low, keening sob coming from the back of the cave. At first I thought it was the wind rattling dead branches against stone, but the sob grew louder, more desperate, ragged breaths breaking into gasps. I set aside my mug of tepid water and rose to my knees, tapping Marcus's shoulder. "Stay," I whispered firmly. He nodded, eyes downcast, and I crawled past him toward the sound. In the dim light, I found Naomi curled against a jagged boulder, hands pressed over her ears, tears soaking her hair. Her usually bright blue eyes, always quick to joke, were hollow and frantic. "Naomi?" I knelt beside her. Hey, look at me!" I placed a steady hand on her shoulder. She flinched, then let her hands fall away, wrists slick with rain and grime. "Everything," she hissed through clenched teeth. "It's too much. The thunder, the bears, the mud. Mr. Calder, I." She swallowed, eyes widening as though the words themselves might choke her. "It's okay," I said, voice low. "You're safe now. We're all safe." She shook her head, sobs catching. It's too dark. I can't breathe." I took a foil blanket and draped it over her shoulders, then knelt with her, pressing my palm to her back in slow circles. I felt the tremor of her body, a live thing shaking beneath the thin metal. "Nye, breathe with me," I coached. "In, 2, 3, hold, out, 2, 3. I counted aloud, exaggerating each number so she could follow. Her breath slowed, split seconds between inhale and exhale stretching longer. Behind me, I heard others stir. Quiet shuffles, anxious eyes peeking from hoods. I held Naomi's gaze. "You're stronger than this storm," I said softly. "You're stronger than you think." She sniffed, wiping her cheek. I just thought I'd never see my dad again." The confession slipped out, raw and small in the cavern's hush. The ache in my chest sharpened. All this time I'd focused on the physical dangers, flooding, wildlife, hypothermia. I'd almost forgotten the emotional toll. These were kids, not firefighters, and fear could be as lethal as a snapped branch. "Tomorrow," I said, voice catching, "you'll be able to hug him again. But for now, this is where we stay, together. We'll watch the fire, tell stories, keep the darkness at bay." I gestured to the coals. "Help me stir it, okay?" Naomi nodded, and I scooted back to give her room. Together we raked the embers, coaxing a few brave flames to dance higher. The others watched, some with cautious relief. Once the fire glowed sturdier, I motioned them inward. "Listen up. I need everyone to share one thing you're grateful for, big or small. It can be silly, a warm jacket, a favorite song, anything." A heavy pause fell, tentative. Then Karina, voice barely above the flames. "My phone charger. I tried to hide it in my jacket, and now I'd trade every selfie for a sip of hot soup." A nervous giggle cracked the tension. Jenna followed. "My little brother. He's tough. He fought off his own panic during our last blackout at home. If he can do that, I can do this." She smiled like she meant it. One by one, each student found something to share. Naomi's dog, Marcus's racing bike, Leo's favorite comic book. The circle warmed with small truths, each confession a tiny anchor against the storm. I waited until every bar had been accounted for and every voice had spoken before I nodded. "That's it. That's our shield." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow is another day, and we'll meet it together." As the students settled, I lingered by the fire, poking the coals and watching sparks drift upward. The forest beyond was silent now, save for distant drips of water. I closed my eyes, picturing my father's compass in my pocket, its needle unwavering, pointing true north. I slipped it into my palm, rubbing the cool brass until I felt its steadiness anchor me. In this storm, in this dark, it was all I had. And sometimes all you need is a single point of certainty to guide you through the worst of the night. Dawn's gray light crept along the ridge as I roused the students with gentle taps and soft whispers. The fire was nothing more than a bed of glowing coals, but in the chill air it still offered warmth. I handed out the last of the hot water, just enough to rinse cold hands, and we stripped off wet layers, slipping into the driest clothes we could find. Today's the day we cross the creek, I announced, voice low but firm. It's swollen by last night's rain, but we'll use the rope and carabiners to rig a makeshift crossing. Stay calm, follow instructions step by step, and we'll all make it across safely. They nodded, eyes wary but determined. Marcus tested his splinted ankle with a gentle step. It held. Naomi wrapped her arms around herself, shivering, but she squared her shoulders. Karina and Jenna carried the rope between them, its length coiled like a sleeping serpent. We descended the narrow spur, boots sliding in the mud, each footfall a negotiation with gravity and exhaustion. The roar of the creek grew louder, a low, throaty growl that reminded me of an animal unchained. When we reached the bank, I paused to take stock. The water surged brown and fierce, swirling around half-submerged boulders, its current pulling at the uprooted roots along the shoreline. "This isn't going to be easy," I said, voice steady, "but it's doable." I knelt and tied one end of the rope to a stout stump high on the bank, looping it twice and setting a carabiner. "Leo, secure the other end to that boulder across the way." He nodded and scrambled down the bank, careful with each step, and secured the rope with a second carabiner. The line ran taut above the water's surface, our lifeline. I held the rope firmly and beckoned Karina forward. "Clip in here," I said, pointing to the tether attached to my belt. "Keep your hands on the rope above you, feet deliberate, eyes on the far bank." Her fingers trembled as she clipped in, then she took a deep breath and stepped onto a mossy log placed beneath the rope, a slim, shifting foundation. I braced the rope overhead, holding tension so it wouldn't sag under her weight. Karina moved slowly, each foot landing with a wet slap. The log wobbled. She gripped the rope tighter, knuckles white. Halfway across, a surge of water struck the log's base, sending a spray that soaked her boots. She froze. I whispered encouragement. "One foot, then the next. You've got this." With a small nod, she pressed on, and within seconds she was on the far bank. Relief washed over both of us. She unclipped, and I sent a quick thumbs up. Then Jenna took her turn, the rope shuddering under her as she crossed more quickly, propelled by adrenaline. Behind me, Marcus and Naomi watched, faces drawn. I gave them each a steadying look. Next was Marcus. The rope quivered as he gingerly stepped onto the log. His ankle protested, but he steadied himself against the tether line. Halfway, his foot slipped, and instinctively he lunged for the rope. The carabiner caught his belt loop, arrested his fall, and held him above the swirling torrent. I tightened my grip on the rope and guided him forward. He made it across, breathing hard but smiling. Naomi's turn came last. I knelt beside her, slipping the carabiner onto her harness. "I know it's scary," I said quietly, "but I've got you. Lean into the rope, not away." She closed her eyes, set her jaw, and stepped out. The log pitched beneath her, and for a moment her boot dangled above the rushing water. I felt the rope's tension change and pulled her level. Inch by inch she crossed, and when her foot hit solid ground, she exhaled a laugh that cracked the tension like a dry twig. With all four secured on the far bank, I followed, clipping in, keeping my center of gravity low, willing the calm that each of them had drawn from me to return in kind. The rope held firm, and I stepped off the log to join them. Behind us, the forest seemed to exhale as we rigged a second line for any supplies that needed hauling across. Leo and Jenna hauled first aid packs, water bottles, and our meager food stores, shuttling them back and forth like pack animals. By the time the final bundle of gear landed safely, the creek's roar felt almost companionable, a reminder of what we'd survived. We gathered on the far bank, mud caking our boots, bodies trembling with both relief and cold. I looked at the students, faces streaked with grime and triumph, and for a beat, everything else faded. The storm, the bears, the flood. All that mattered was the simple fact that we'd faced a rushing, merciless river and crossed it as one. I let my arm rest on Marcus's shoulder. "See," I said softly, "together, step by step. That's how we get through." He offered me a weary smile. Naomi stretched out her arms and spun once, as if testing her freedom. Karina unfolded her foil blanket like a banner of victory. "What's next?" she asked, voice steady. I checked my compass, still pointing true north, and let the students gather around. "Next, we find the logging road and set up our final signal. Then we wait for rescue. But first," I tapped a finger against my lips, "warm up, rest, and eat. You've all earned it." They cheered with small laughter, relief bubbling over. And as I watched them settle beneath a break in the trees where weak sunlight filtered through, I felt something I hadn't in days. The first flicker of hope that rescue would come soon, that we would return to dry clothes and warm beds. But more importantly, I felt something deeper still, the unshakable truth that even in the wild's most ruthless crucible, we could prevail together. The thin sunlight that filtered through the pines felt like a blessing as we settled on the logging road's battered berm. Our makeshift fire smoldered in a rusted barrel I'd scavenged from an old equipment cache, embers glowing red against our foil blankets. The kids huddled close, rubbing numb hands and trading bites of jerky. For a moment, the forest's roar fell away, replaced by whispered conversation and the occasional crack of wood. I watched them eat before taking a small handful myself, savoring the meager meal. Each chew was a reminder that calories here meant survival, but even as hunger gnawed at my ribs, my concern stretched to the injured one, Jenna. Her twisted ankle had held through the river crossing, but now swelling threatened to trap her in place. I sat beside her, tracing the gentle rise of her cheekbones with a glance. "How's it feeling?" I asked quietly. She blinked, as though rousing from a dream. "Better than I thought," she said softly, flexing her foot against the splint. "But I can't walk far." I swallowed. In my pack lay enough rope and carabiners to lower her down a steep embankment to the road's level, but then she'd be utterly helpless, unable to hike the final stretch to any clearing or shelter. The rest of the group was limping but moving. Marcus's ankle, Karina's bruised knee, Naomi's cuts, all manageable. Jenna's injury was a linchpin. If we carried her, we'd slow down dramatically. If we left her, I squeezed her shoulder. "Listen," I said, voice heavy, "the nearest roadblock is about 2 miles east. I can hike ahead alone and get a radio signal out once I'm there. But you'll have to stay here, set the fire, signal smoke, and wait. It might be hours." Her eyes widened, shock rippling over her features. "You can't leave me," she whispered. "I have to," I said. "If I stay with you all, we could run out of supplies before help arrives. But if I go, now, you'll be safe here, and I'll bring rescue as fast as I can." My heart pounded, guilt curling in my chest. She pressed a trembling hand to mine. "Promise you'll come back?" I closed my eyes, fighting the surge of doubt. But the compass in my pocket felt steady, a lifeline of purpose. "I promise," I said, voice firm. "I will come back for you." She nodded, swallowing hard. I pulled her into a gentle hug, careful not to jostle her leg. Around us, the other students watched in silence, absorbing the weight of the moment. I gathered my pack, checking the radio's batteries and the small emergency beacon tucked in its pocket. Then I bent to adjust Jenna's splint, tightening the bandage without crushing her calf. She bit her lip, but gave me a small, brave smile. "Go," she said, voice soft but resolute. "I'll be okay." My throat constricted. I looked at each of the students, 12 young lives, fragile as saplings in last night's storm. "Stay together," I ordered gently. "Keep the fire alive. Ration the water. Use the mirror to flash the sun if you see a helicopter." I handed Karina the mirror I'd carried since the first day, its surface scuffed but serviceable. They positioned Jenna against the barrel, draping an extra blanket around her shoulders. Marcus handed her a cup of water. Naomi offered a jerky bar. Karina clasped Jenna's hand. I stood, slung my pack over one shoulder, and took one last look at the group. Flushed faces streaked with grime, eyes shining with trust and fear and hope all at once. "I'll see you soon," I said. With that, I turned east, boots crunching over gravel and glassy mud, and walked away. Each step carried me farther from their circle of warmth, deeper into the forest's muted hush. Behind me, a thin plume of smoke curled into the morning sky, our promise to each other. As the trees swallowed me in dappled shadow, I pressed my hand against the compass, feeling its quiet insistence. I would not let them down. I would carry the weight of this promise over every swollen creek, past every fallen tree, until help arrived, and until I returned to them. My boots crunched over gravel and broken branches as I followed the logging road hill, the compass needle a steadfast flicker toward help. My pack throbbed against my shoulder, weighted with radio gear and the spare mirror. Sunlight broke through ragged clouds, slanting across the slick road like a spotlight. I checked my watch, nearly noon. Every second felt borrowed. Every breath I drew carried the weight of 12 lives waiting back on the ridge. At a sharp bend, I paused where the road widened into a clearing littered with abandoned machinery. I dropped my pack and fumbled for the handset, flipping it open. Static hissed in my ear, then a crackle. Mayday, mayday. This is teacher on Ridge Camp Road, coordinates 40 north, 12 east. 12 students stranded after storm. Request immediate evac. My voice shook, not from fear, but from the vast gulf between this lonely road and the circle of frightened faces I'd left behind. An agonizing minute passed, then voices, distant and professional. Acknowledged, came the reply. Stay put. ETA 60 minutes. We copy your beacon. Relief crashed through me, but it fought with guilt. Guilt that I'd left Jenna's side. Guilt that I hadn't promised a faster return. Copy that, I managed, swallowing hard. We'll hold position. I set the radio aside and pressed the mirror against my palm, angling it toward the sun. Each flash was a silent plea, a morse of hope shimmering over rusted bulldozers and fractured earth. At the edge of the clearing, I tucked into a shallow ditch, crouching low but moving the mirror in wide sweeps. Every time the sunlight caught it, I imagined my students spotting it, an unspoken message. I haven't forgotten you. 30 minutes later, a distant thrum rattled the forest floor. I looked up to see a pair of helicopter rotors carving the sky, a medevac bird painted in bold orange stripes. My heart thundered as the chopper descended into the clearing, skids jolting onto gravel. 2 rescue techs leapt out, radios crackling. Teacher? You okay? One asked, eyes wide as he grabbed my shoulder. I nodded, voice raw. Yes, but my students, they need help now. He glanced at my mirror, then back to the sky. We'll lift you first, then head to your signal fire. They strapped me into a harness. As I lifted off, the world dropped away. Trees shrank, the swollen creek gleamed brown below, and the ridge where I'd left my students rose like an island in a turbulent sea. My stomach churned. I peered back at the ridge top, searching for that thin plume of smoke. For a moment it vanished beneath the rotor's downwash, then flickered back into view. Once aloft, I relayed precise coordinates. The pilot banked sharply, the rotor thrust hurling rain in sheets across the windshield. I closed my eyes against the spray, imagining each of my students huddled around the fire, their silver blankets glowing like beacons of faith. Moments later, the chopper hovered over the ridge. I could just make out tiny, huddled figures waving. I unstrapped and leapt onto the ground, racing to wrap my arms around Jenna first, her eyes rimmed red but bright with relief. Karina, Marcus, Naomi, and the others pressed close, voices tumbling in a jumble of laughter and tears. Behind us, the rescue team fanned out, checking fractures, handing out warm packs, loading the injured onto stretchers. The leader approached, clapping me on the back. You did good, he said quietly. Very good. I let the students guide me toward the chopper skid. As I helped Jenna onto the stretcher, she looked up and whispered, Thank you for coming back. Her words, simple and true, settled in my chest like the forest finally going silent. Together, we lifted off again, this time toward safety, toward warmth, toward home, carrying with us the raw bond of survival forged in storm and shadow. 2 weeks later, I stood at the front of room 213, the late morning sun streaming through the blinds. 12 empty desks were arranged in a loose semicircle, one for each student on the camping trip. My heart still pounded at times, a remnant's echo of wind and thunder. In place of backpacks and rain-soaked jackets lay projects, math quizzes, art assignments, the everyday debris of school life. Around me, undergraduates chatted about weekend plans, oblivious to the silence I carried within me. Then the door opened, and they filed in. Karina first, tall and steady. Jenna, leaning on crutches but eyes bright. Marcus, arm in a sling but sporting a grin. Naomi, cheeks still flushed from recounting the fire circle ritual. Leo, ever the quiet protector. And the rest, each bearing a small scar or bruise as proof of our ordeal. They took their seats, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then Karina raised her hand. Mr. Calder, she said softly, thank you for everything. A hush followed. I looked at each of their faces, older somehow, more solid in the light. I'm proud of you, I replied, voice thick, not just for surviving, but for how you cared for one another. That's the real lesson of the forest. They exchanged glances, and Jenna's foot tapped in its splint. We learned more from you, she said, about courage and grit and hope. Their words settled over me like warm rain. In the weeks since rescue, I'd replayed every decision, the leaves of what if ever fluttering in my mind. But here, in this classroom, I saw proof that our choices had held firm. A sister helping another, laughter breaking tension, a group bonded by fear and fire and river. I walked around the semicircle, pausing by each desk. At Marcus's chair, I tapped the metal frame. "You found your strength," I said. At Naomi's, I squeezed a folded note she'd left me. "Thank you for listening," and felt the weight of trust. Back at the front, I placed a small compass on my desk, its needle steady. "This," I told them, "is for you, a reminder that when the world tilts, you can find true north in one another." They looked on, eyes bright, as I opened my laptop and projected a single image onto the whiteboard, the ridge-top shelter, smoke curling above the trees. "Let's never forget where we came from," I said. "And let's carry forward the lessons we learned, both in the forest and in the storm." A soft chorus of agreement rose, and in that moment I knew the storm had passed. Not just the one that nearly broke us, but the one that tested our hearts and minds. Together, we'd weathered it. And now we were stronger for it, ready for whatever lay ahead, wherever our true north might lead. That was the story. If you made it this far, thank you. Truly. Your time, your attention, your support, it means everything. If you felt something while listening, tension, fear, hope, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And if you want more immersive survival horror stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. I've got more stories that'll leave your heart racing. Until then, stay safe out there.